So, question 4. Most human cells use carbohydrate as a source of energy. Explain why glycogen releases energy more slowly than glucose. So, glucose is a monosaccharide. So, it is a monomer. So, this is the monomer of glucose. Glycogen is a polysaccharide. So, it is a polymer of what? Of glucose molecules. So, this is what it would look like. And it is bonded by glycosidic bonds. Now, what happens is that these glycosidic bonds would need to be broken in order for the glucose to be released, and then it can be used as energy. Whereas glucose, we directly have the monomer, so we can just straight away use it as energy. So what's making the energy release slow is the breaking of the glycosidic bonds. Now, when human cells have used up carbohydrate, they will use lipid and then protein as a source of energy. The table shows the water content and energy content of 3 food sources. So you have carbohydrate, triglycerides, protein, and triglyceride is the lipid. Explain why the water content of triglyceride is different from the water content of carbohydrate and protein. If we look at the water content, we can see that triglycerides have no water at all. And that is expected because carbohydrates and proteins, if we look at them, carbohydrates, we said, can be monosaccharides, disaccharides, polysaccharides, and what they all are is basically glucose or other sugars. And sugar, we know, is a polar molecule. So it is hydrophilic because sugar will dissolve in water. It's hydrophilic. Proteins, they are amino acids. And an amino acid structure is this. Now, these are polar groups, and so polar groups equals hydrophilic, and so they will bond with water. If we look at lipids or triglycerides, they are fatty acids and glycerol. And although the glycerol is an alcohol OH, it would be hydrophilic. It is packed with a fatty acid. So you've got 3 fatty acids for 1 glycerol, and the fatty acids all have long chains of carbon. Carbon, 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 carbon. Carbon is hydrophobic. Is hydrophobic. Why? Because carbon molecules are non-polar. And the hydrogen molecules that are present are attached to a non-polar group. And so they won't be, they won't have enough power to do anything because they don't count as polar groups. Even though we see OHs and here a H2 that would bond with water because it has a polar group attached to it. Well, an electronegative atom. That's a different topic. And so the whole thing you have to take into consideration, which is polar. And the whole thing here is non-polar. So that's why. And so therefore, when we put water with the carbohydrates and the proteins, water will happily associate with them. But when you put them with the triglycerides, the water will be repelled and they will not mix. And so you would have 0. Using the information in the table, explain why triglycerides are a good energy store. Well, let's see. You have in dry matter and you have in wet matter. So when we have the triglycerides. Triglycerides are both higher than carbohydrates and proteins in both wet matter and dry matter. And that is the first mark, is that you have more energy in dry and wet matter than in carbohydrates and proteins. And we have to explain, well, why? Because we said that triglycerides have a lot of carbons, and with them they must have hydrogen. And this means that they've got a lot of bonds. And so when we release a bond, it's exothermic. And so it releases heat, which is energy. So the more bonds broken, the more heat released, and so the more energy released. And again, because we said that they are hydrophobic, so they've got no water, it makes them concentrated in these carbon-hydrogen bonds. And so they've got more energy to release. Whereas if you've had water, then you would be ingesting the food that has a lot of water, so you're not entirely you're getting full, but you're not getting full because you've got something that's concentrated with a lot of energy. You're getting full because you're concentrated with everything that has water. And that's the case with carbohydrates and proteins. Whereas here, you're getting full only on these bonds that are going to release a lot of energy. So, explain why the total energy stored column in this table is of limited use in drawing conclusions about the energy content of this food and these food sources. Well, that's the exact same reason why when we are answering this question, we didn't look at this. Because look at these units. We said in the previous questions that to compare them, they all need to have the same units. Look at this, kilojoules, and then you've got grams and -1, kilojoules, grams, -1. It's just kilojoules. So you cannot compare them because the units are not the same. And the units here, we know that kilojoules is only used for energy. Whereas the kilojoules and then the gram and the -1, that indicates mass. So to compare them, you cannot do. And that's it.